Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today I'm going over a scenario for the 2026 Senate elections. Now I want to preface this by saying this is just a scenario for 2026. This is not my official Senate prediction for 2026, which as of the time we're recording this video will have come out a few days before this video. So if you want my official prediction, make sure to check that one out after this video. This is a purely hypothetical scenario for 2026. Now that being said, on my 2026 map, I currently have about 47 Senate seats that I have as safe for the Republicans and 42 that I have as safe for the Democrats. Now, unless something that happens I'm not currently expecting or forecasting to happen, I expect all of these states will remain with their respective parties. I don't think there's really much chance of any of these getting competitive. The only one that maybe could change would be the state of Alaska if the former Democratic Representative Mary Peltola decided to run for Senate in Alaska instead of House or Governor. And at this point, there's been no indication saying that she will do that. But right now, Republicans start out with 47, Democrats 42. And the U.S. Senate, the way it works is if the Vice President of the United States is a Republican, the Republicans then only need to get 50 Senate seats to have a majority of the U.S. Senate. But if you don't have the Vice President on your party's side, the Vice President breaks all Senate ties, just to be clear. Democrats would need to get 51 Senate seats to have a majority, and that flips. When Kamala Harris was the Vice President of the United States, the Democrats only needed 50 Senate seats to have the majority, Republicans needed 51. The purpose of today's video is going through a scenario in which I think it's the likeliest for the Democrats to have the Senate majority in 2026, getting 51 Senate seats. How would they do that? Not can they or will it happen, more so of how I think they would do it if they could. So the first thing I'm going to do is go over the states I already expect to be likely Democratic wins, meaning in between 5 and 15% margins of victories. Everything in the red or blue color I currently expect will be more than 15 points. These are two states in Minnesota and New Mexico. Now, this is going to be in New Mexico. I believe Democrat Ben Ray Lujan, I believe, is going to be up in this term, as Martin Heinrich was just up in 2024. It was a 10-point win for Heinrich in 2024. Even though the last time Lujan was up, he only won by 6 points. I expect it will be a Democratic win by that margin. Now, Minnesota is going to be interesting because it is an open race. Tina Smith, the Democrat, is not running again, though two Democrats, Peggy Flanagan, the Lieutenant Governor, and Angie Craig, the U.S. Representative from the 2nd District, are running on the Democratic side. It was a 5-point win back in 2020 with a lot of vote splitting from a third-party candidate. And then in 2024, we saw Amy Klobuchar win by 15.7%. So I think, barring something completely out of left field here, Minnesota should be a pretty reliable Democratic win. Those two Senate seats get Democrats up to 44, and unless, it's someone that's like a hyper-partisan, you're not really going to get any Republicans arguing that Minnesota or New Mexico are going to be likely Democratic states, probably at the floor. So that gets Democrats 44. Democrats are still about 7 Senate seats away now from winning back the Senate. The next Democratic path is holding on to the seats that I currently have as lean Democratic, including 2 very key contested Senate seats that I'm watching very closely. The first is the state of New Hampshire, which is currently held by Democrat Jeanne Shaheen. Now, she is not running again. It is an open seat, but the Democrats have gotten a very strong candidate to run for this race in 1st Congressional District Representative Chris Pappas. And he has done a very good job at the House level at representing that 1st Congressional District, which at times has either been an even district or even a Republican +1 district for a little bit. Now it's listed at Democrat +2, but he's won re-election by about 8 points now in the last 2 elections. 2020 was his closest test where he won by 5. 2018, he won by 8.6. So Pappas has done a very good job at holding that district by likely Democratic margins. Now, he will be facing off against Republican Massachusetts former Senator Scott Brown, who I think actually is a very strong candidate and is going to make a very legitimate push in New Hampshire at making this a competitive race. And if I can give some advice to Democrats, that's someone that I don't think the Democrats should take very lightly, as yes, even though Scott Brown is from Massachusetts and he did run for Senate in 2014 in New Hampshire versus Jeanne Shaheen, Jeanne Shaheen and the Shaheen family is a very powerful political family in New Hampshire, right up there with the Sununu's. And Brown came within 3.2% of defeating Shaheen after just 2 years moving up to New Hampshire, being Massachusetts Senator and running against Shaheen. He almost came very close to defeating the powerful Democratic incumbent, who did win by over 15 points in 2020. So Brown, I do expect to be a very strong political figure and political fight in 2026. But the Democrats right now, I still expect will win this race by a little bit under 5%. Currently, I have around a 4.5% win for Pappas over Scott Brown at this time. But let's say Democrats hold on there, which in the current predictions on the Senate map, they should. That gets Democrats up to 45. The next Senate race that I think the Democrats are most likely to hold is the state of Georgia with Democratic Senator Jon Ossoff. And a large reason for this is I think Jon Ossoff could still be in some trouble in the Senate race, but Brian Kemp, the governor of Georgia, not running against him, gives Jon Ossoff a much stronger chance at winning this race. We saw a Senate race in Georgia in 2022 where the Democrat Raphael Warnock and Republican Herschel Walker on the first initial election, Walker only got 49.44%. Warnock got 49.4%. Walker got 48.5%. Neither candidate broke 50%, so they advanced to a runoff. Raphael Warnock ends up winning by a lean Republican margin. We saw this very same scenario play out in 2020 for both Ossoff and Warnock in that one. I think we see something similar in 2026. I think Ossoff could win on election night, but I think it's more likely than not, whether he faces off against Mike Collins, U.S. Representative, Buddy Carter, U.S. Representative, or Derek Dooley, the former football coach who Governor Brian Kemp is likely going to endorse. I think we're still going to see Jon Ossoff probably go to a runoff election against one of these Republicans, and then we're going to see Ossoff win by a lean Republican margin. That gets Democrats up to 46. The next Senate race I'm watching very closely is the state of Michigan. Now, Michigan's a wide open race as Democrat Gary Peters is retiring, and he will not be running for this race. The Democrats have a contentious primary underway in the state of Michigan between Democrats Mallory McMorrow, Abdul El-Sayed, and Haley Stevens, and that's going to be a close primary to watch, especially after 2024, where Lisa Slotkin only defeated the Republican Mike Rogers by 0.34%. However, a very important thing here is this was with President Trump at the top of the ballot, where he won the state of Michigan by 1.4%. So when you look at it that way, you could argue Mike Rogers underperformed President Trump by approximately 1.7% on that ballot. Without President Trump at the top of the ticket in a 2026 midterm election environment that should be more Democratic friendly than 2024 was, unless the Democrats put up a candidate that's very unpopular, we're probably going to see Democrats narrowly win the state of Michigan and keep this race in the Democratic hands. So that would get the Democrats up to 47. Now we're getting into some states currently held by Republicans that Democrats will need to flip. And the first and most likely one to happen right now is the state of North Carolina. And I'm saying this because North Carolina, though it's been a competitive toss-up state at the presidential and Senate level for roughly about 10 to 15 years now, it has been almost pretty reliably a lean Republican state at both the presidential and Senate level. The last time it went for the Democrats at the presidential level, you have to go back to 2008 when Barack Obama defeated John McCain by 0.33%. At the Senate level, the last time it went blue, this one you also have to go back to 2008 when Democrat Kay Hagan won by 8.5%. Now, the reason that many Democrats are so bullish on this race is former Democratic Governor Roy Cooper is running for this U.S. Senate race against Republican Michael Whatley. The Republican incumbent senator, Tom Tillis, announced he is not running for this race. So it's an open race against a Republican opponent that isn't too well known compared to the former Democratic governor. So Cooper starts out with a higher name identification. He left office with very high approval ratings, and Democrats feel he's a very special candidate that could win a very close Senate race here. So in this scenario, it's going to be very close. Well, let's say Roy Cooper wins. This gets Democrats up to 48. Republicans are at 47. Even if this exact map played out on election night, which, being completely honest, at this point, I don't think this is too unrealistic for the Democrats to hold Michigan, Georgia, and New Hampshire and flip North Carolina. So far, this all seems very plausible. The Democrats are still two seats down of 50, and if they want to win a majority, they need to win 3 more to get to 51. The next Democratic target at this point would be the state of Maine, where this is Republican incumbent Senator Susan Collins, and this is going to be an interesting state because Maine at the presidential level is actually a pretty solid, or I would say more of a likely Democratic state. Kamala Harris won against Donald Trump here by about 7 points in 2024. Joe Biden won it by 9 points in 2020. And the other senator from the state of Maine is independent Angus King, who does caucus with the Democrats. So he wins here by a safe margin in 2024. But the current senator in this race is Republican incumbent Susan Collins. Now, Collins is very interesting because she is a Republican senator and she does vote, I would say, a majority of the time with the rest of the Republicans in the Senate, but she does frequently catch the ire of President Trump for breaking with Trump over, for instance, a lot of his nominees for cabinet positions or other such bills. Collins is one of the first Republicans, along with Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, to frequently break with the president. And that has actually given her, despite her low approval ratings in the state of Maine, a lot of support among independents and even some Democrats in the state, so much so that despite losing in the polls, she was able to win a upset election in 2020 and hold on to her seat for another 6 years. Now, this is going to be interesting for 2026, as the Democrats do not have a strong candidate currently running in the race in Maine. So much so that I think if the election took place today, I do think Susan Collins would actually narrowly win and hold on for another term. But if the Democrats could get a stronger candidate to run, like Governor Janet Mills, who is currently considering a run for Senate, she has not ruled it out at this point, that would give the Democrats a much stronger chance at winning this race. It's still not a guarantee it would be a Democratic flip, but I think Janet Mills would give the Democrats a plausible path to defeating Collins in that state and in that race. If the Democrats do that, that gets them to 49. They're then within one win away at breaking 50%. And this is where things start to get tough, because all four of the remaining Senate seats that I think the Democrats could contest were all pretty reliable red states for Donald Trump in 2024. However, the state that I think gives the Democrats the best possibility of the four remaining would be the state of Ohio. Now, you may be thinking, Ohio, that's a state that used to be a very competitive swing state, but that state just voted for Donald Trump at the presidential level by 11 points in 2024. How could that possibly be a competitive state? Well, you'd have to look at the Senate level, where the Democratic senator was Sherrod Brown. Sherrod Brown had a long political history in the state of Ohio, and he was defeated by Republican Bernie Moreno by 3.6% in 2024. Now, again, in 2024, Donald Trump was at the top of the ticket, driving voter turnout, and Bernie Moreno won by less than half than President Trump's margin at the presidential level, again, in this situation, in large part due to the prowess and incumbency advantage that Sherrod Brown had in this race. The argument here would be that if Sherrod Brown were to run again for this race, it would be in a more Democratic-friendly election environment and would give the Democrats a stronger chance in the state of Ohio at winning it this time around than it did in 2024. Now, not everything's in a vacuum, though, as the Republican incumbent is now John Husted, who is more of a, I would argue, popular Republican than Bernie Moreno was as a challenger, and Husted being an incumbent means he's certainly more likely to win. This is where I think the Democrats' path for 2026 and getting the 51 Senate seats gets really tough, is I don't think Ohio is going to flip blue, even with Sherrod Brown in the race. But if the Democrats were going to get there, Sherrod Brown winning an upset in the state of Ohio, I think would certainly be the way to do it. Now the Democrats at 50 Senate seats only need one more win to flip and get the Democratic Senate majority. And of the three states remaining, Iowa, Nebraska, and Texas, Democrats would only need to win one of these three seats. Now, I'm going to go through all three separately and then talk about which one I think is actually the most likely one, because the answer may surprise you. First, I want to start with the state of Nebraska, where it's a really special case because if the Democrats were to win Nebraska, it wouldn't really even be technically a Democratic win. Independent Dan Osborne ran a very close race in 2024 against the Republican Deb Fischer. And Fischer won by 6.7% after Osborne caught really everyone by surprise and how close of an impressive campaign that he won. Whereas the other Republican, Pete Ricketts, won against a Democrat by 25 points. In 2026, we're going to see Pete Ricketts facing off against Dan Osborne. So this race is going to be a lot closer than Ricketts' 25-point win from 2024. However, this time around, the Republicans know who Dan Osborne is, they know how popular there is, and they also know that Pete Ricketts is a stronger candidate than Deb Fischer, so they're probably going to have an easier time at winning this race than Deb Fischer did in 2024. But the national environment for 2026 should also be more favorable for the Democrats than the Republicans in 2024. So it's going to be really interesting to watch for. I personally don't think Nebraska is going to go for Dan Osborne. I think Pete Ricketts is going to win. But I think it's an interesting scenario that the Democrats maybe would get to 51 Senate seats due to an independent winning a Senate race in Nebraska and not even a Democrat. Now, he says he would not caucus with either party, but the Democrats would have to see it as a win with him winning the Senate race in Nebraska. In the state of Iowa, this is Republican incumbent Senator Joni Ernst, who won by 6.5% in 2020, Now, she certainly has her popularity problems. In the state of Iowa, her recent statements about healthcare and saying that essentially that we're all going to die eventually was certainly taken in very, very bad by a lot of voters in Iowa and around the country. And she certainly has electability concerns. And that does open the door for the Democrats at potentially winning the state of Iowa if they do face off against Ernst again. The question will be, though, is Ernst's unpopularity enough to really put the state in play after Donald Trump just won the state in 2024 by about 13 points? And we just saw the Senate race for fellow Republican Chuck Grassley go red by 12.2. I don't think it's unrealistic to say Iowa may fall under 5 points on Election Day due to Ernst's unpopularity, but seeing her lose, I think is a little bit more of a stretch, even given how unpopular she may be come Election Day in 2026. Now, I went with Nebraska and Iowa first because I think the seat that might actually be most likely to flip to the Democrats may honestly be the state of Texas. And that sounds absolutely crazy, and I'm not even totally sure I believe it. But in this scenario, I actually think Texas may present the Democrats the best scenario for them at getting 51 Senate seats in 2026. And here's the reason why. The Republican incumbent John Cornyn is up for re-election. If he goes on to the general election, John Cornyn is going to win, no doubt about it. But if John Cornyn wins the primary is the big question here. The Republican Attorney General Ken Paxton is waging a primary challenge to Cornyn. And at this current point in time, Ken Paxton is leading in the Republican primary by anywhere from 10 to 20 points in most polls that have come out. And Ken Paxton has been shown in recent polls to be way worse of a general election candidate than John Cornyn does. So much so that if John Cornyn leads on a poll by 10 points, Ken Paxton only leads by 2 or 3. So he puts the Republicans in a much more vulnerable position if Ken Paxton is the Republican nominee. And that's with his past scandals being impeached, and also I believe he does have some personal problems and issues going on as well. I'm not going to delve into them in this video. I really don't like to talk or meddle in that stuff, but if you want to look up more information about that online or on YouTube and other videos, you certainly can. But just for the sake of that, there is some personal issues going on with him, and I'm just going to end it at that part. But Ken Paxton would be a much weaker Republican general election candidate. Democrats who are running Democrat Colin Allred, maybe some other Democrats could be jumping into that race as well, could see that race as a much more winnable adventure if Ken Paxton becomes the Republican nominee. Now, that's no guarantee that the Democrats would win this race, but I think it gives the Democrats a much stronger chance, or at very least a stronger chance than I see for Nebraska and Iowa. And it's also worth noting that when you look at recent elections, yes, Nebraska was only 6.7% for the Republicans in that Senate race in 2024. Joni Ernst's Senate win was 6.5% in 2020. A lot of people may forget this. Back in 2018, Democrat Beto O'Rourke came within 2.6% of defeating Republican Senator Ted Cruz in that Senate race. So Texas, of the three, actually in the last 10 years or so, has the closest Senate race result of the margin of victory of these three seats that are remaining. And given the Republican nominee for the Senate race in Texas may be a very flawed candidate, that actually may give the Democrats a stronger chance at winning this race. So to get the Democrats to 51, I think the Democrats first have to win New Mexico and Minnesota, which I think they'll do without any problem. Then the Democrats would have to hold on to New Hampshire, Michigan, and Georgia, three seats that I think Democrats should probably hold on to. New Hampshire. Michigan, Georgia is a little bit dicier, but I think the Democrats at this current point in time have a slight advantage in those races. Then they have to win North Carolina, which in my own personal view is a 50-50 state. Then they have to win Maine, where I think the Republican is narrowly favored right now, but come Election Day could be 50-50. Then they have to win the state of Ohio, which I do think is a Republican-leaning state. And then they have to win Texas, which I think is more of a likely Republican state. But if the Democrats were able to do this, it would get them to 51. Republicans would be at 47. Republicans could then win Nebraska and Iowa in the likely categories I have them now. Democrats would have a 51-49 majority in the Senate. Now, obviously, if you're looking at this map, I think objectively, this map seems pretty ridiculous, and the Democrats aren't going to be able to do this in 2026. States like, I think, Texas and Ohio are just really too, I'd say, partisan and move towards the right under President Trump's leadership at the top of the Republican Party, that we're probably not going to see them go blue, even in a 2026 election environment. But in a scenario to get the Democrats to 51, this is how I think the Democrats' best case at doing it would be. Now, maybe Nebraska with Dan Osborne could be more competitive than I'm talking about it, but I think Texas with Ken Paxton is more of a likely flip for the Democrats than Nebraska. But again, we'll have to wait and see how that all goes. But this is very interesting. It also underscores how Republican-friendly the Senate map really is, as when you look at the seats that I've given to the Democrats, like Texas, like Ohio, like North Carolina, like Michigan, like Georgia, they all voted for Donald Trump in 2024. New Hampshire was under 3 points. In Maine, despite being a likely Democratic state with a Republican incumbent, it also was, I would say, would be more of a likely Democratic state, but Susan Collins being the candidate gives the Republicans a stronger chance of winning. So this map for the Democrats, I don't think is realistic. It's going to be tough for them to even come close to doing so. But if you're going to tell me the day after 2026, the Democrats found a way to get to 51 Senate seats, this is, I think, the most plausible path to them doing it. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you did. Leave a comment below, tell me your thoughts, and I hope to see you in a future video.